The Simple Path to God, discovering the way back to authentic faith. Father Spiridon Bailey is a priest of the Diocese of Great Britain and Western Europe of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, serving in England and Ireland. On this video podcast, he applies the teaching of the Church Fathers to modern life with reference to the Sunday Gospels. Here now is Father Spiridon.
In the Gospel of St. Matthew, Jesus presents to us a series of images in parables of how we are to understand the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like, the kingdom of heaven is like, and so on. And in the 25th chapter, we have Jesus teaching the parable of the master who goes away and leaves with his servants so many different talents, one with 5, one with 2, one with 1 talent, and returns to question them what they've done with the talents he's given them. Now, St. Gregory the Great tells us this parable shows us the mercy of God because he is warning us of what we will face in judgment. St. Gregory the Great says to us that there is a responsibility that each of us have for all the blessings, for all the gifts, the skills, the abilities, the natural and spiritual gifts that God has given. And that God, when he returns to judge us, will call us to account for exactly how we've used these gifts, these blessings. But St. Gregory the Great says to us, we who have been given much will be judged more severely. If we have been given much in this life, God will judge us more severely on the day of judgment, because we have this responsibility to use the gifts he's given us. Now, we must recall that there are many kinds of gifts. As I said, there are spiritual and there are natural. All of us, every human being, is endowed with some natural gifts of some kind. Even before we are Christian, we may be able to use these skills, these gifts in different ways. And then when we are baptized and illuminated, we are given spiritual gifts. All of these gifts, whatever their nature, whatever their kind, must be used in the service of God. Now, in the parable, Jesus presents to us different servants, and there is one servant who is judged very harshly by the master in the parable. And we must ask ourselves, who is it we identify with? Who are we in this parable? When it comes to the different servants, how are we using these talents given by God? Jesus describes how the master calls the servants, and the one servant comes to him and says, I buried the talent you gave me in the earth. Here it is, what you gave me. The Church Fathers, when they look at the spiritual meaning of these parables, remind us that when Jesus says a character in the parable buried or was buried in the earth, it can represent the tomb, of course, but it can also represent the world. Here we have a warning. We are not to use the blessings, the gifts, the skills, and bury them in the earth, to use what God has given us purely for earthly, worldly benefit, for worldly gain. They are to put to the service of God. And if we use them for our own security, because of our own fears, our anxieties about worldly things, if we turn everything that we have been given by God simply to serve ourselves, then we are the ungrateful, unworthy servant. On Judgment Day, the Fathers tell us that God will judge and weigh exactly what we have done with what we've given. The scales of God's justice will be, on one side, all that we have, all that we have been given. And on the other side, what did you do with them? What did you gain? Or, the language of the parable, what interest did we make on the talents that God gave us? There are many kinds of interest that we can make, of course. And the spiritual blessings that God has given, the interest that God looks for is transformation, is change, repentance. In the language of the saints, theosis. Transformation of our hearts, change, turning away from our evil ways, turning away from our habits, our patterns of sin. The faithful servants, Jesus tells us through this parable, will be rewarded with treasures and talents beyond anything that belongs to the earth. The heavenly, eternal treasures of God. These will be the rewards for those servants who've used their talents in this world as God wills. We are to make interest on everything that God has given. To use our skills not just for our benefit, but for the service of God and the benefits of everybody around us. Whether we are talking about our skills, our abilities, these gifts that God has given, or our relationships, our families, our friends, our work, our personal wealth. Whatever it is that we have been blessed with can be turned for a blessing to other people, can become a blessing in the world from God through us. Now in the parable, of course, the servant who has been judged harshly because he buried the talent then accuses his master. He says, well, I knew what a harsh master you are. I knew that you reap where you don't sow, and so on. He begins to chastise even his master in his own defense. And the master says to him, you responded with fear of me. Here, the church fathers tell us, this servant represents all of us who do not seek change, who do not seek transformation, who do not seek spiritual growth out of fear. We can fear stepping beyond the securities of our lives. We can fear letting go of control. We can fear loving. We can fear repenting because it challenges us. Orthodox Christianity is not a emotional or psychological crutch. It isn't something to support us in this mental way, something just to lean back on, to take comfort from in this world. Of course, it brings us joy and it brings us comfort. The reality of God's love is the greatest comfort of all. But Orthodox Christianity challenges us, and it insists that we change, that we look at ourselves and how we are living. How am I using these gifts that God has given me? To what benefit am I putting them? Is it for my own bank account? Is it purely for my own security and self-interest? Or am I putting the gifts of God to the service of God and for the blessing of all? So when we hear this parable, all of us who know that we've pursued darkness, we must remember none of us can claim not to have received a gift from God, a blessing from God. Every one of us is created in God's image. Every one of us has the spark of divine life within us. We are created in the image of God. Every one of us must recognize that we must be humble about what God has given. We must be grateful for all that God has poured into our lives. And when we review, despite the fact that we've pursued darkness, despite the fact that we have covered very often the blessings and gifts within ourselves with selfishness, with all the passions that plague us, let us come to our senses. Let us hear the words of Jesus in this parable. Let us seek out all those things we've buried in the world. If we have taken these blessings, these gifts and skills, and truly buried them in the earth, let us go and dig them up. Let us change. Let us begin to use these things properly. That on Judgment Day, when that master who in the parable went off to a far country and then returned, we're reminded that Jesus is returning. Every moment his return comes closer. Much of the world will be caught off guard. Much of the world will be unprepared. But Jesus warns us that we may be prepared. that we may live according to his commandments, that he may not catch us unawares, but in his mercy says, look, I'm coming, there is judgment. Put your trust in me, live the way I command you. Dig up those things that you have buried in the earth and offer them to the service of God.
The Simple Path to God, discovering the way back to authentic faith. Father Spiridon Bailey is the author of several books, including Orthodoxy and the Kingdom of Satan and Journey to Mount Athos. You can email Father Spiridon at simplepath@ancientfaith.com. That's simplepath@ancientfaith.com. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.